Hey, it's Dante. Before we get started here, I just want to make a quick note. I didn't realize until after recording that my mic was clipping for this entire episode. As far as I know, it does not go away and it does not sound great. So apologies for that, but let's continue on anyway. The show must go on. For as long as there are things to discuss with myself, my life and times, then it must. So many of the recurring pillars of this show are kind of in fluidity now, out in the ether. They're gone. The people that have defined my favorite episodes of this thus far, my recording studio, are gone. No longer with us in this time and place, for I have moved on. Or more so, stagnated more than they have physically. I have stayed much in the niche I've established for myself, while others have spread out and moved on to new places. And that's okay, because we define our own importance and sense of movement through our affairs on our own scale. And we'll get back to that. Willkommen, bienvenue, welcome. Why is the thumbnail red? Ew. Okay. It's not red. It's a wine rouge. It's burgundy. The boison, if you will. It's a red with some purple mixed in, to be honest. It's a very light red. It's not pink, it's light red. A light red. Well, there's a number of layers to that answer. And it was not really an intentionally artistic choice to, set a new visual precedent for a show that has no visuals. The fact is that my college finally caught on after I graduated, that I had graduated, and took away my access to the Adobe Creative Cloud. I was hoping to rob a couple more months off of them, but I guess when it comes to the financial burden of having students at your institution, they tend to be a lot more on top of that shit than affairs such as mental health incidents and the like. You could read into it as much as you want, really. I decided to just switch it up. I've been really into jewel tones lately, and frankly, when I tried to replicate the original thumbnail in a not a vector program, a raster program, I like to use Autodesk Sketchbook, which I stole from them for free years ago. We're seeing a pattern here. It just wasn't, the contrast wasn't right, and I'm all about contrast, so we can't have that. So I just figured switch it up. I've been really into jewel tones lately. So now we got this fucked up evil version of our classic blanking plate. Just a glimpse into my dark reality. But you can read into it as much as you want. It's something about reinvention. A lot has changed, a lot has happened, as I will keep repeating until that is not the case, which I would hope is a point we don't arrive at, because then I would have nothing to talk about except pure introspection, and we don't want that. That's not good for you. You need balance. Go outside, do your homework, etc. But it's hard to deny that even if not by my own actions and my own pure intent, I am being reinvented, reshaped maybe, because the platform is remaining the same, but its circumstances are eroding it into something new. You place a perfect cube of granite into a riverbed and go get a coffee, come back, 5 to 6 million years later, it's going to be a different shape. It is worn away by its circumstances. The fluid movement around it, eating into its molecular structure, and defining a new shape that is a pure product of that niche environment. Something like that, meaning I just finally got a job and moved into a new apartment. Isn't that fun? in this new job, I finally made the move to go full time, which, well, it's not my first full time job ever. I was a power equipment technician a few years in the past, and I loved that job. Wonderful little local establishment, people I still value very greatly to this day. And now I'm working at unnamed auto parts industry retailer and warehouse location, getting people the bits they need to continue their projects while I neglect my own. And boy, are some people's problems fascinating. Some of them don't even exist. They make the drive all the way to the store that half of the time I have to drag myself out of bed to get to, with no intent of finding a solution in mind, because you're there, and they know you're there, and they can use you to get whatever frustration out that they need to. But that just comes with the territory. On the way to work today, I don't know exactly what struck me to do so, but I finally, yeah, a little late to the party, listened to the Chromacopia album by Tyler, the Creator, who, mind you, is an artist who I was always familiar with. I knew his sound, and I could name a few off the top of my head. And I have a great deal of respect for the effort that he puts into his work and kind of the unique vibe it has within its genre. Yeah, no disrespect towards any of that, but I was not a recurring listener, so not a figure that I can speak on, from memory and past experience. But being so late to the party, I wish I had I wish I had a review that was more useful for reigniting discussion, but honestly, all the praise I've heard showered onto this is pretty valid. It was interesting hearing people talk about this album at first, because it wasn't fanatical attention, but more like people were having like a highly rational expression of respect for the introspective nature of this work. I was driving 15 minutes across town in my ancient car with a straight through exhaust, with the volume up just loud enough to hear it over the wind noise. So I was reading into the lyrics only as much as that environment allowed, and it really blew me away. This brings nothing new to the table except my experience, that I'm sure millions of people have had in a similar way to myself. Part of my relationship with music is that I don't go to it to feel. It's a form of escapism. It's one I can justify as being more healthy than other mechanisms I might have access to. So I don't usually go into listening to any album, individual song for an emotional experience. I love the sensation of instrumentals for the most part. Very, very rhythm heavy sounds. I felt the need to talk about this one because, as I was on a tight schedule making my way to work, and why would I be in the mood to seek out introspective emotion on the way to work? But the songs in this album are so loaded with that. I think that's arguably the point of this creation, and I really appreciate that he was upfront about that and very clear throughout the whole piece. And it's able to explore all these things without seeming narcissistic. It's about reinvention, but not putting the current self on a pedestal. It was really refreshing to have an emotional response to music that didn't immediately result in a deep-seated misery. Because when I'm discussing music with people in the past, and one of the places we usually part ways is, people use sad music. You can define sad however you want. Sad, very heavily emotional music to relate to, justify, and reflect onto their own, feel it more deeply, and help resolve it that way. But the way I respond to fear, paranoia, trauma, stress, historically has been running from it. I'm finding, more healthy ways to do this. So I seek out music that helps me retain the calm that I'm seeking from whatever little amount I have. Something more upbeat even when I'm in the darkest of times. Keep me afloat just enough that I can work through these problems in a healthy way outside of it. Speaking of working through things, I don't know what about that album got me thinking about this, but as I said, I've moved into a new apartment in a new neighborhood, and it ain't much, but it's honest work, and I'm putting it together with a good friend of mine. We are making it happen, carving out my own little niche in the world. However insignificant that might be, it's mine. A key component to that, all the trials and tribulations of which there have been many, has been the matter of defining my own scale of progress. I'm a college graduate. I low-key have I low-key have a bachelor's degree. There we go. If I could catch a breath enough to get a thought out, that'd be fantastic. You sure about that? Defining your own progress is the key point to maintaining your sanity in a completely unfamiliar stage of life. You know what that calls to mind? Cream cheese and banana bread. That's right. There's an Aldi down the street from us, an Aldi grocery store, and before I can start making my own banana bread from a fantastic recipe that's been passed down to me, they have a good a good sliced banana nut loaf, something light enough in the morning, a little bit of fruit in there that won't make me throw up immediately on my way to work. It's only 3 out of 5 days a week. I don't need to go see a doctor. And, you get your banana bread, your cream cheese, a little, I've heard it's good toasted as well, but that's a story for another time. This requires experimentation in advance. When I first moved into this apartment at the beginning of I think it was like a month and a half of unemployment, as I was, exploring what job options were even out there for me, I had just enough cash to keep me afloat and barely enough to get food to get me through the day. Half of my food was still at my old apartment. And, as that was being moved over, I was actively going through it, and there was almost nothing left at the end of the day. So I went and bought some banana bread. A little bit of caloric intake for my efforts. And I was like, finally. It had felt like days since I had had a moment to myself. I sat down at our new kitchen table, which was about the only piece of furniture we had. I got my block of cream cheese. I went to the drawer. And there were no knives in that drawer. And I was sitting there, scooping cream cheese off of a block with a fork and alternating bites of banana bread and cream cheese fork at my table in the dark by myself in my bathrobe until I felt like I had enough food in me to get through the next couple of hours. And that was my morning routine. The money for silverware came later, and I didn't even realize it until like weeks later because I had been in a whirlwind. I had bought more banana bread at this point. I opened the drawer and I was like, oh my god, I've moved up. And I picked up a knife and I was able to spread the cream cheese on my banana bread like a normal person. And I sat back down at my table in my bathrobe and I thought things are really coming together. I'm moving up in the world. I have a specific utensil for putting the cream cheese on my banana bread. Maybe everything's going to be all right. And I spend a large majority of the harder times that I go through not ignoring the pressing matters that I'm in, but just getting through it all in service of that manic elation that I know will overwhelm me when I move through it. And that's defining your own scale of progress. That's just what it is for me. I'm not saying it's healthy, but it's what's going to get me through this particular chapter. That now I have specific utensils for putting my breakfast together. And that is a huge upgrade from even weeks before. And that's just me. However you do it yourself, a huge component of that is pacing. Pacing has been a continual struggle for me as an artist, always. It's a struggle for me now at my job. Just there's a goal, especially when you're dealing with a customer who might need something obscure, and maybe they don't even know what they want. I'm overcome by not even a desire, a need that takes me and says, you need to get this person, sometimes the person's myself, you need to get them through this as quickly as possible, ideally with an acceptable result. And over time, I've realized I apply the same practice to characters that I write into my stories. I need to get back to my writing after so much time, of course. This is kind of the furthest extension of it at the moment. But I rush my characters through scenarios because I know they have a goal. And I am so goal-driven that even I as an author latch on to that. I was going through my notes and I saw that at some point I had theorized an essay I should write. It was pertaining specifically to industrial design practice and pacing yourself through your projects. I was going to call it It's Not That Deep. I don't remember exactly when I took this note. It doesn't have a timestamp, but it's presumably midway through my senior year of college, when our design capstone projects were really ramping up. The decision period was over. It was time to get down to business. And, there's a component of, were we paced correctly by our professors? That's debatable. God bless them, they were incredibly helpful at every stage of that process, and I wouldn't have traded them for anyone else in the world. But the pacing always felt off in the sense of how we are expected to pace ourselves, which is understandable because everyone's projects were so wildly different in form, scope, and process. But that was a recurring issue for me, knowing how I experience this in my artistic endeavors and in business, of course. But I theorized this essay, It's Not That Deep, it was specifically about losing yourself in individual steps, creating these niches in your process, maybe certain things that speak to you. At the time, I was designing a tubular frame structure for a project, and I had gotten in so deep with the geometry and the measurements, the angles, how the angles affect form and proportion, that I was losing so much time to this process. And what occurred to me one day is, let's say you're actually shaping this product for production and the mass market, right? The customer will be able to acknowledge through their experience that you have crafted a superior product. But the time that once you start wasting time on that specific step, even if you put way too much weight on it, I cared so much about this part, the customer will never know that. You will never know them. You can research them best you can, but you will never have the face-to-face with your customer outside of niche circumstances where you will be able to say, you should appreciate this bit more because I spent so much time on it. This is not to discredit what that time is worth, but you need to realize when you're falling down that hole and pull yourself back into pace. Does that make sense? I'd hope so, because it made sense to me and got me out of a tough situation. I see people having the same issue with writing and literature. It's so easy to get attached to the personas you've crafted, especially in something that is a character piece. But throwing your character into a situation that is extremely meaningful to you as the author will not necessarily mean that your reader will want to go through 80 pages of that, aside from the maybe 20 pages of actual experience that your character will have. I think you can project this into a lot of different scenarios, and I really do want to write it someday. But I need to figure out, what form this will take. How do I pace it? Oh, the problem is itself. It's a tesseract. Fuck! It all folds in on itself. We'll get over it eventually. Speaking of narrative craft, I've been spending a lot of time lately on book YouTube. The channel Quinn's Ideas, I think it's Quinn's Ideas, is an absolute standout, especially for sci-fi. And the fact that, he makes a point to mention in the beginning of his videos that human narration of these topics is so valuable, and he aims to continue that. I have a great deal of respect for that, so I've been, listening to these sci-fi recap videos in the background of my daily affairs. And I'm overcome with this simple innate desire to just consume more stories than I already do, which is a high bar. I value that so much in my life, just collecting stories from other people, authors down to even irate customers. I love hearing what people are up to. This is about what I'm up to, and I can go back and listen to it if I want. However, I currently have a, I don't know, maybe 300-page book by Paul Theroux sitting on my side table, and I haven't finished it in almost 8 months. I'm close, but the interval between my reading sessions has grown so vast that it's just a little disheartening. I don't even know how much time per sitting it would take for me to really get back into consuming stories. At worst, I would think, I would give up the need to eat to be able to read more. Meals have become such an obstacle in my life for so long, which is at contrast with how much I value food and how important food has been to my upbringing and just the culture I was surrounded with. I love cooking, but I would absolutely give up the incessant need to pursue other things. That time, again, the pacing is off, so none of it works. If I could have those extra, I don't know, hour, 2 hours that eating takes up during the day, consumes, if you will, if I could have that back and force myself to actually do something with that time, I feel like would be an incredible change. But that's the kind of a wish that, when granted, forces a character to learn a hard lesson. I just don't know what it is yet, but a man can dream of a highly subjectively perceived better way to use his time. So he says, if granted, he will learn. He will suffer and learn. His desire is the root of all suffering. Speaking of that, I do have a rather substantial design announcement for once in my life that's taking place out of the higher education sphere. But I'm absolutely so happy, so thrilled. Oh, I don't know if I've ever used that word before. I sound like I'm on LinkedIn. More on LinkedIn, by the way, in a second. I'm very pleased that some part of my work has followed me out of higher education. I'll be posting details of this anyway. Again, if you'd like to view my other work, that's Instagram at @dv_autoart. I'll have some updates, reveals, and whatnot, but it's so nice to have a continuation, to know that all of it wasn't just temporary in service of one goal, that I can reflect myself as a designer now having moved beyond it. However, there is the matter of announcing things. How do you announce things in a manner that feels both respectful to the content and yourself? I got a lot of qualms with the LinkedIn platform there's no denying that it has been absolutely revolutionary to the way we view and seek and engage with employed peoples, and the industry they are within. I'm mostly on design LinkedIn, and that's its own unique bubble. But it was hard for me to even announce good news about my own work on the platform that is specifically for that objective. Because I am very big as a artist on brand building. Behind my pursuits in packaging and product design, brand building might be my favorite of the group. Personal branding, creating fictional companies and shaping their product line as practice. How does it reflect onto itself, and what view does the consumer base get of it? What is the consumer base and their demographics? How does that reflect onto the needs of the product, right? And personal branding is very fun to put together. How do I reflect myself and my work as a product, right? But I have been fighting a mind war due to my deep hatred of engagement farming. Oh, I hate it. Because putting in all this effort is hardly worth it on a public platform unless you get your ROI on that artistic expression, Online engagement with the content you produce, engagement farming. I despise it because I see how it's done in the digital, we'll call it the YouTube Shorts era. Short form content is absolutely king, and I don't produce video content hardly at all in any form. Most of my work, it's physical, it's visual, it doesn't really have motion that constitutes filming to go with it. At least as I've currently set it all up. Maybe there's an answer to that, but I don't know it. My desire to build a strong personal brand and find a successful way to publicize it is at stark contrast with my moral objection to, like I said, putting myself as the artist on this pedestal in front of everyone who will see it. Because these are people I value a lot on a personal level. Many of them are. Many of them are evil and wicked, and we don't talk about them. And I don't know how much the guilt of really pushing myself out there would catch me up in my ability to actually create the content. It comes back to the guilt. I don't want to be that guy who's putting himself everywhere. And yet, I want to be seen for return on investment on the things I've created. Fighting a mind war on the battlefield of the LinkedIn hyper-reality. A new reality. It's not that new, but this bubble that's been created within the realm of our own human experience that is objectively formed of human people sharing their experiences. And yet you scroll through, and it's so hard to believe that any of them, who I don't know face to face, are real. Real people don't talk like that. And if you meet someone who does, it comes off as just this hostility, this like primal paranoia of something about you is not real. That guy back there is not real, I say to myself in my head as I scroll past every hypocritical "the job market is in shambles" post. Yeah, but you're sitting there typing out this 4-paragraph cope instead of defining your own scale of progress. I'm going back to work this afternoon. I got shift changed in the middle of my initial shift. All our managers are back from who knows where they've been for who knows how long, so things are a little shaky right now. But I'm going back this evening, and something, maybe it was the music, struck me on my drive home, and I was itching to record, to put some words out there. Thank you all for being with me. Good night.